At the 4th of July cookout, my daughter's words cut through the air. She's just here for the free food. Still, I held my breath, my fingers curling around my cup. As laughter echoed around me, the heat of the grill intensified, mingling with the sting of her dismissal. While everyone else continued to celebrate, I realized how long I'd been invisible in my own family. That's when I knew. It was time to stop hiding in the shadows. I stood up, my heart steady, and walked away. All right. Before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The warm, oppressive air of the 4th of July cookout pressed down on Claire as she stepped onto the manicured lawn of the Petersons' suburban home. The scent of sizzling burgers and sweet, overripe watermelon mingled with the sound of distant fireworks popping in the background. She hesitated on the sidewalk for a moment, her eyes scanning the crowd of laughing families, children running barefoot, and couples nursing cans of beer. It all felt so foreign, so out of place to her now, as if she had wandered into someone else's life. Claire hadn't wanted to come, not really, but Jess had insisted, as always, offering her that fake smile and telling her, "It'll be fun, Mom. Everyone's family here." She hadn't been convinced then, and now, standing in the heart of it all, she knew she never would be. Her daughter, Jess, was already at the center of a conversation with Luke's parents, her long, slender arms wrapped around a red Solo cup, one perfectly manicured eyebrow raised in mock amusement. Jess's voice, sweet as it sounded to strangers, had always grated on Claire's nerves. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. Always with that undercurrent of superiority, as though Claire's very presence was a nuisance, a reminder of things Jess no longer needed. Claire pulled in a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. She was here for Jess, for family, and maybe, just maybe, to see if she could find a way to fit in with them once more. Before she could make her way to the group, Jess's voice sliced through the air. It was casual, almost lighthearted, and yet it landed on Claire like a knife. "Well, now she's finally alone," Jess said, as though she were talking about an event, about something happening, something trivial. "Helen's widowhood," she added with a shrug, offering the words as a fact, like the weather or a stray comment at brunch. Claire's stomach churned. She froze on the spot, her face blurring into a mask of nothingness. Her pulse thrummed in her ears. Alone? It felt like the ground beneath her had cracked open, swallowing her up. She'd always known that Jess didn't understand her grief. How could she? Jess had never lived the life Claire had, never endured the loss, the crushing silence that followed the death of a partner. But to hear her say it so matter-of-factly, like her mother's widowhood was an afterthought, was almost unbearable. Finally alone. But Claire wouldn't give Jess the satisfaction. No, she wouldn't show weakness. Not now. Not here. Taking another steadying breath, Claire forced a smile and moved toward the table where a few guests stood, sipping their drinks and laughing at some inane story. As Claire joined the group, she heard Jess's laugh from across the yard. It was loud, ringing with a careless ease, as though she had no idea how much her words had cut through the fabric of their already fragile relationship. How many times had Claire swallowed that same laugh over the years? How many times had she excused Jess's sharp tongue, telling herself it was just the way she was? Jess's laughter drifted over to her like a bitter wind. How can she not know? The guests around Claire shifted uncomfortably, aware of the tension that always followed Jess's remarks. It wasn't even a secret anymore. Everyone had witnessed the growing distance between mother and daughter. But nobody said anything. They were too polite, or too afraid to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth hanging in the air. Claire tried to focus on the conversation in front of her. A man in his mid-30s was talking about his recent trip to the Caribbean. She nodded along, her smile tight, her eyes not quite seeing him. All she could think about was how her daughter had so effortlessly dismissed her pain. Jess was still talking to Luke's mother, Nancy, her back to Claire as she enjoyed the sound of her own voice. Claire watched them, wondering how Jess could be so blind to the consequences of her words. How had she become this way? But then Helen Peterson, the matriarch, the ever-graceful, ever-cold woman who had never been warm to Claire, stepped back into the crowd, gliding toward the porch with her high heels clicking lightly on the stone pathway. Her presence seemed to draw all eyes, yet it only reminded Claire of how little she belonged here, how easily she had faded into the background. Helen's eyes met Claire's for a fleeting moment. Claire braced herself for the usual cool acknowledgement, the nod that never reached her heart. Instead, Helen's gaze flickered briefly, and then her lips twisted, as if suppressing some private amusement. Then, without a word, Helen turned and walked inside, her back straight and regal. She had always been like this, too polite to openly snub Claire, but always, always reminding her that she was nothing more than an outsider here. Claire felt her heart tightening. It wasn't just Jess now. It was everyone, all of them, one after another in their own ways, pushing her away. And what stung the most was that they didn't even realize they were doing it. With the hum of voices around her, Claire's thoughts began to swell until the tightness in her chest became almost unbearable. She wanted to scream at Jess, to tell her how much that one offhand remark had ripped through her like a raw wound, but she wouldn't. Not here. Not in front of these people. Instead, she gave the group one last strained smile and made her way toward the drinks table, her hands tight around the edges of her cup. She'd learned long ago how to bottle it up, how to swallow the bitter pills of rejection. But somewhere, deep down, something was beginning to shift. Something was waking up in her. As she reached the table, Claire's eyes swept across the backyard once more. Jess was now mingling with a group of Luke's friends, her voice still loud and piercing, but Claire wasn't listening anymore. Maybe it was time for something else. Something new. She didn't know how yet, but she would. Her life wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And she'd be damned if she let Jess or any of these people think otherwise. The tension hummed in her chest as she clenched her cup. This was just the beginning. The sun beat down on Claire's skin, its heat pressing through the fabric of her blouse, but it was the weight of the tension around her that truly made her uncomfortable. The hum of chatter, the clink of glasses, the sizzle of meat on the grill. Everything felt distant, like she was watching from the edge of a life that wasn't quite hers. She'd always been on the outside, always a little too much of an observer in her own family. But today, it felt heavier. Jess was still caught up in a conversation with Luke's friends, laughing too loudly, her voice cutting through the crowd with an air of forced ease. She had always commanded attention in a room, but today it felt more like a performance. The laughter wasn't for anyone else. It was a shield, a way of keeping everyone at arm's length, including Claire. Luke, standing beside her, looked every bit the charming husband, polite, eager to please. His shoulders were squared, his smile a little too wide. He could see it too, the fracture in the family dynamic, but his attempts to smooth things over only deepened the awkwardness. He tried to engage Claire with small talk, asking about her garden, about her plans for the summer, but his questions lacked the warmth that once came so naturally. It wasn't for lack of trying. It was just different now. "So, how's that little rose bush of yours doing? The one you planted last year?" Luke asked, his voice light, though his eyes darted nervously to Jess as if waiting for her approval. "It's thriving," Claire replied, her words automatic, her smile too tight. She could feel the knot forming in her stomach as her gaze flicked to Jess, who was barely acknowledging her, lost in conversation with someone else. Luke's politeness felt like a thin layer of frosting over a cake that had gone stale. There was no substance, no connection. Just a veneer of pleasantries that Claire had grown so accustomed to over the years. How many times had she smiled through this? How many times had she played the part of the dutiful mother, the quiet wife, the background figure in a life that wasn't truly hers? She wanted to say something, to ask him if he even noticed, if he could feel the strain in the air. But instead, she just nodded, swallowing down the words. They both knew the truth. They had drifted so far apart. A couple of feet away, Jess's voice rang out again, sharp and laced with sarcasm. Must be nice, being able to live in a house with a garden. Not everyone can afford that kind of luxury, can they? She said, half laughing, half sneering, as she took a long sip from her drink. Claire's chest tightened. How long had Jess been making these kinds of remarks? It was subtle, but relentless. Always that little sting beneath the surface, the sort of comment that could never be confronted without sounding petty. And Luke? He was nowhere to be found. His back was turned, absorbed in another conversation, leaving Claire to face the full weight of Jess's disdain alone. It wasn't just the words. It was the way Jess spoke, the way she looked at Claire sometimes, as if everything she did was a mistake, as if she were nothing more than a shadow in her daughter's world. Claire felt a flicker of anger stir within her, the familiar burn of being made to feel small. It was always like this. Always Jess and her cutting remarks. Always Luke's quiet complicity in the background. It had been this way for years. But today, as she sat there, trying to sip her lemonade, it felt unbearable. How much longer could she tolerate this? How much longer could she sit quietly, watching as her daughter systematically undermined her? Her mind drifted to the past, to the years she'd spent running after Jess, always putting her needs before her own, always being the dutiful mother, the constant caretaker. How many birthdays had Claire missed out on living her own life? How many quiet moments had she sacrificed, letting Jess take center stage? And for what? So Jess could grow up and turn into someone who barely saw her anymore? Who didn't even know the weight of the years Claire had spent holding the family together? Claire's fingers tightened around her cup, the cold plastic pressing into her palm, the ice inside clinking loudly against the sides. The questions were the same ones she'd been asking herself for years, the questions that had no answers. She stood up, her legs stiff from sitting too long, her heart heavy. She couldn't do this. Not anymore. Not in silence. She pulled out her phone and dialed Charlotte's number, needing someone who could see her. Really see her. Someone who wasn't tangled up in the web of Jess's manipulation. The phone rang twice before Charlotte answered. Claire? Charlotte's voice was warm, familiar, a lifeline. How's the cookout going? Awful, Claire said quietly, the words tasting bitter. She glanced around at the happy, oblivious guests. It's just the same, Char. Same old stuff. Jess. She's still making those comments. Passive-aggressive jabs, and I just breathe, Charlotte interrupted, her tone calm, centered. You've been putting up with this for a long time, haven't you? Claire looked out over the yard, the voices around her starting to fade as she focused on Charlotte's steadying presence through the phone. She didn't have to explain the years of tension, the quiet resentment that had been building. Charlotte understood. It's more than that, though, Claire murmured. It's the way she looks at me now. Like I'm just there. A fixture. Like she's waiting for me to just disappear. Claire, Charlotte said softly, you've sacrificed a lot. You've given her everything. And now you're realizing you have to give something to yourself. It's time to start standing up for you. Claire's chest tightened again, but this time with something different. A spark. A possibility. Don't let this go on, Charlotte urged. You're stronger than this. You don't have to be the invisible woman in her life anymore. It's time to stop tolerating the disrespect. You deserve better. Claire's throat tightened as the words sank in. She wasn't sure what came next, but she knew Charlotte was right. Something had to change. The sound of Jess laughing in the background cut through Claire's thoughts, sharp and high. She glanced at the backyard one last time before turning away. She wasn't going to let this be her life anymore. This cookout, this day, it was going to be the moment she stopped being invisible. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The answer was coming. Claire sat at the edge of the patio, the sounds of the cookout swirling around her like a distant echo. Jess's laughter rang out again, sharp and high-pitched. But Claire didn't look over. She couldn't. She wouldn't give her daughter the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. Not now. Not when she'd already spent a lifetime burying the pain for the sake of someone else. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree near the fence, but it couldn't shake the heaviness that sat on Claire's chest. She was alone here. Again. Distant and removed from everyone. The familiar ache of being unnoticed settled in her bones, and for the first time, she didn't try to hide it. Her gaze wandered over to Jess, standing with Luke's family. Jess was laughing with Nancy, Luke's mother. Tossing her hair back in that way Claire knew all too well, like she was the center of the universe, like everyone was meant to orbit around her. Luke's family, with their polished lives and flawless facades, seemed so comfortable in their wealth, their place. Jess, now part of that world, fit right in. She was no longer the girl Claire had raised, no longer the child who needed her. Claire's thoughts drifted, slipping into a time long ago. Mom, I need new shoes. These are ugly. Jess's voice echoed in her mind, a memory from when she was just 10. Claire had worked 2 jobs then, one as a receptionist at the local dentist's office and another in the evenings at a bakery, just to make sure Jess had everything she wanted. Every time Jess asked for something, Claire found a way to give it to her. She pushed aside her own desires, her own needs. Claire had saved every penny she could, squeezing her budget until it was tight enough to strangle any notion of a personal life. And yet, even then, Jess's eyes had never softened with gratitude. Not once. Jess had been too young to understand sacrifice, too spoiled to appreciate the quiet effort behind every gift, every little thing Claire had done to make her life easier. Can you just make sure I get a ride to Sarah's party tonight? I'm going to need a new dress too, since my old one's too tight, Jess had said, even as Claire, exhausted and drained from a week of double shifts, had smiled and agreed. Because what else could she do? And then there were the birthdays, the way Jess had always expected everything to be perfect. The gifts, the cake, the attention. Claire had spent hours every year at the expense of her own self-care, planning parties, organizing events, only to be forgotten once the last piece of cake had been eaten, Jess moving on to her next desire, her next demand. Claire's eyes closed for a moment, the old, familiar ache of longing cutting through her like a sharp blade. It wasn't just the years of giving everything to Jess. It was the realization that none of it had ever been enough. Jess had never noticed, never cared. And now, watching her, standing there in that effortless charm with Luke's family, pretending to be one of them, Claire knew. Jess wasn't just ignoring her. She was leaving her behind. The gap between them had widened into something unbridgeable, something Claire didn't know how to fix anymore. Must be nice, Jess had said earlier, her words still hanging in Claire's mind like a poison. Claire hadn't even had the strength to defend herself, to remind Jess of all she'd done, all the years spent making sure Jess could have whatever she needed. Because really, what was the point? Jess didn't care, but Claire did. A sharp voice broke her reverie. Helen Peterson, Luke's mother, had approached her. She was smiling, but there was something cold in her eyes. Claire stiffened, her hand tightening around her drink as Helen came to stand beside her. "Claire, dear," Helen said, her voice like the rustle of silk. "I couldn't help but notice you're here alone tonight. I do hope you're not feeling out of place with all the family here." Claire didn't respond immediately. Helen's passive-aggressive sympathy was something Claire had grown used to. It wasn't an outright insult, but the subtlety of it stung more than anything Helen could have said directly. "I'm fine," Claire said, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "Just enjoying the evening." Helen smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. "Of course," she said, glancing around as if Claire's presence were an afterthought. "I just find it so interesting how much time we all spend in this bubble, and then when things change, well, it's a bit of a shock, isn't it?" A chill crept up Claire's spine, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she turned her gaze back to Jess, who was still laughing, still pretending to belong in a world that wasn't hers. It wasn't just that Jess had changed. It was that Claire had never been able to fit in. She had spent so many years trying to force herself into the mold, thinking that maybe, just maybe, if she tried hard enough, they'd all see her as one of them. But all it did was exhaust her, hollow her out piece by piece. Her life had become a series of small sacrifices for the people she loved, and now she wondered if that was all she had left. Was she defined by the needs of others? Was her entire existence just a backdrop to their story? The thought was suffocating. A faint glimmer of something rose within her. An ember. Small, but bright. It was the first real spark of anger Claire had felt in years. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at Jess or Helen or any of them. It was about reclaiming herself, finding her own voice again, before it was too late. Claire stood, suddenly aware of the weight of her own body, the way her legs trembled with the quiet power of what she had just realized. She was tired of fading into the background. The cookout was still going on, but for Claire, it had already ended. The question now was how she would make her next move. The cookout was still in full swing, but for Claire, time seemed to stretch into infinity. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the distant pops of fireworks. It all felt like a background noise to the storm inside her mind. It had been years of silent suffering, of absorbing Jess's cruel comments, her dismissive glances. Today, though, something had shifted. Claire was tired, tired of being invisible, tired of letting Jess's disregard shape her every moment. She watched Jess from across the yard, her back straight, her head thrown back in laughter as she chatted with Luke's cousin, a man Claire had never met. Jess's eyes glinted with the same cold detachment they always had whenever she interacted with her mother. There was no warmth in her gaze, just a calculation, a sense that Jess only used her mother when it was convenient. Claire had allowed it for too long. The words Claire had been holding in for years pressed against her chest, threatening to burst out. She couldn't keep swallowing them down. Her heart hammered in her chest, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was resolve. Claire stood up, the tension in her muscles almost electric, and took slow, deliberate steps toward Jess. Her breath was steady, but inside, her thoughts were a whirlwind. This is it. This is the moment. As she approached, Jess caught sight of her, a flash of recognition crossing her face. Jess's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, offering Claire a cool, insincere greeting. "Oh, Mom, I didn't even see you standing there. You're, blending in with the garden so well," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Claire stopped a few feet away, her feet planted firmly on the ground. The gentle evening breeze played with the strands of her hair, but the storm within her was still. She could feel the weight of the moment, the weight of everything she had kept buried, pressing down on her. "Jess," Claire said, her voice quiet but firm. "We need to talk." Jess raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smile that was anything but friendly. "Talk? About what?" She glanced around the circle of people who were pretending not to watch, clearly enjoying the tension of the unspoken drama. But Claire wasn't playing anymore. "I'm not here for your entertainment or your insults," Claire said, each word deliberate, cutting through the air like a sharp blade. The words felt foreign on her tongue, but they tasted like freedom. Jess's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, the surprise flickering in her gaze before she quickly masked it with a laugh. "Oh, come on, Mom. You're being dramatic." "I was just kidding," she said, brushing it off like it was nothing. But Claire saw through the mask, saw the way Jess's words had always been an attempt to push her down, to make her feel small, and she wasn't going to let it happen anymore. "No, Jess, this isn't a joke, not anymore." Claire's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now, a steel she hadn't known she possessed. "You've been treating me like this for years, like I'm nothing, like I'm just here for you to belittle whenever it's convenient." Jess's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered, tilting her head back, laughing lightly, as though trying to make a mockery of Claire's words. "Oh, Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. You're being sensitive." Claire's heart pounded, but she didn't back down. "Not this time." "I'm not being sensitive, Jess. I'm being honest. I've spent years putting up with your remarks, your disregard, but I'm done. I'm not here to be your punching bag." The tension hung thick in the air. For a brief moment, Jess looked like she didn't know how to respond. The laughter died on her lips, and her eyes flickered with something Claire hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, maybe, or fear. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her usual deflection. "You really need to lighten up, Mom. People are just having fun," Jess said. But there was an edge to her voice now, a defensiveness that hadn't been there before. "No, Jess," Claire said, her voice unwavering. "You will not speak to me like that again." The words felt heavy, final, and as she said them, something deep inside her clicked into place. She wasn't asking for respect anymore. She was demanding it. Jess's face hardened, her brows furrowing as she glared at Claire. For a long moment the two women stood in silence, the space between them crackling with tension. Jess looked around the group, perhaps searching for support. But no one spoke. The others had faded into the background, leaving them to their confrontation. It was Luke who finally stepped in, his face flushed, looking uncomfortable. He cleared his throat, trying to break the growing silence. "Come on, Claire, Jess. Let's all just—" His voice trailed off as he took a step forward, his attempt to mediate falling flat. Claire turned her gaze to him, her jaw tight. "No, Luke. You've been silent for far too long. You've let this go on, and now you want to step in? Now you want to mediate?" Her voice was soft but sharp, cutting through him with the weight of her frustration. "This isn't about you. It's about me. I've been invisible in your family for too long, and I'm done." Luke's eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to say something, but Claire wasn't waiting for his apology or his excuses. She wasn't going to keep fighting for a place at a table that had never been hers to begin with. She turned away from them both, her back straight, her head held high. Jess's voice followed her, calling after her, but it was hollow now, weak in comparison to the quiet strength Claire felt swelling within her. As Claire walked toward the door, her heart was still pounding in her chest, but there was no fear anymore. She had said what she needed to say. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. The question that lingered now was simple. What comes next? And Claire knew that she was ready to find out. The silence that followed Claire's words seemed to stretch out, unbearable in its weight. Jess stood there, her face flushed with anger, her eyes narrowing as if trying to process what had just happened. Claire's heart hammered in her chest, but there was no turning back now. She had said what needed to be said. Jess didn't speak, and neither did anyone else for a long, painful moment. And then, just like that, Jess stormed off, her heels clicking sharply against the flagstone path as she walked briskly toward the house, her back stiff with indignation. Her departure cut through the air like a sharp, bitter wind. Claire watched her go, not feeling the satisfaction of winning, but the quiet sorrow of knowing that things between them had changed forever. The rest of the cookout, which had been filled with easy laughter and friendly chatter only moments before, now seemed eerily still. The air was thick with tension. People tried to resume their conversations, but their voices faltered. Their words became a faint hum in the background, a mere attempt to cover the discomfort that lingered like a dark cloud over the gathering. Luke's family, the Petersons, shifted awkwardly in their seats. Claire could see their eyes flitting between each other, whispering behind their smiles. A few exchanged nervous glances, their discomfort palpable, but none of them had the courage to step in or offer any kind of support. It was clear to Claire now that she had become something of an outsider in their eyes, a bystander in her own daughter's life. Claire stayed composed, though her insides churned. She didn't let her guard slip, not for a second. She would not let them see how deeply Jess's words had hurt her, not after everything. The past years of biting her tongue, of absorbing the passive-aggressive comments, had built a wall around her emotions. She wasn't going to let it all come crashing down now. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink, her fingers trembling ever so slightly around the glass, but her face was the picture of calm. The quiet in the air felt like a judgment. But Claire refused to let it break her. Jess was the one who had left, not her. Jess was the one who had walked away from the confrontation, not Claire. Helen Peterson approached her then, her footsteps soft and deliberate, as if she were careful not to disturb the fragile peace. Claire stiffened, but didn't turn away. Helen's presence was as cold and calculated as ever, and Claire knew exactly what was coming. Helen smiled, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the same smile Claire had learned to recognize over the years, a smile that was wrapped in thinly veiled pity. "Claire," Helen began, her voice a soft murmur, "I do hope you're not taking all this too personally. Jess can be difficult at times, but you know how she is, right?" She glanced at Claire, her expression almost too sweet. "She doesn't always think before she speaks." Claire's stomach twisted at the words. She'd heard this before. It was Helen's way of minimizing everything. The distance, the disdain, the years of belittling remarks Jess had made about her. Helen thought it was all just part of Jess's difficult nature, as though Claire's hurt was nothing more than a passing inconvenience. "I'm fine," Claire said, her voice calm but hard. She didn't need Helen's pity. She didn't need any more empty reassurances. "I've spent too long trying to be invisible to everyone in this family. I think I'm done with that now." Helen's eyes flickered briefly with something Claire couldn't quite identify. Annoyance, maybe, or embarrassment. But then, just as quickly, Helen's polished smile reappeared, and she let out a small, clipped laugh. "Oh, I didn't mean to imply, of course, Claire. You've been such a good sport all these years. Always so kind to everyone." The words felt like salt in an open wound. Good sport. Claire was supposed to be grateful for the scraps of tolerance they threw her way. She had been a part of their family, yes, but always on the outskirts. Always the one they tolerated out of obligation, never respect. The realization hit her hard. That's how they saw her. Not as someone with a life of her own, but as a fixture, a background character. It was in the way they spoke to her, in the way they treated her like an accessory to Jess's life, rather than as a person with her own hopes, her own needs. The quiet judgment in Helen's words now only made it clearer. They saw Claire as nothing more than a charity case. Someone they allowed into their world because they had to, not because they wanted to. That was the moment Claire knew for sure. This wasn't just about Jess. It was about the Petersons too. How they had let her exist in the margins of their world. How they had never truly seen her, never truly respected her. And in that moment, something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to be that person anymore. She wasn't going to shrink, to take whatever scraps of affection they offered. She was done being the invisible woman in her own life. Helen continued to babble on, trying to soothe the tension, but Claire was no longer listening. Her thoughts were far away, on the new life she was about to create for herself. She turned her back on Helen, stepping away from the table. She wasn't running away. She was walking toward something better. Something that had always been there, just out of reach. As she walked across the lawn, the sound of the cookout faded into the distance, leaving Claire with nothing but the certainty of her own power. This was just the beginning. And whatever came next, Claire would face it on her own terms. The evening had fallen into a hushed, oppressive quiet as Claire walked away from the cookout. The distant hum of voices, the crackling of the grill, the laughter that had once felt so suffocating now faded behind her like the closing of a door. She didn't look back. She couldn't. As she made her way back to her car, the weight of the evening settled on her shoulders. Jess's departure, the awkwardness of the remaining guests, Helen's thinly veiled pity, it was all too much. But Claire didn't feel defeated. She didn't feel broken. She felt something else, a strange, powerful sense of clarity. This was the moment, she thought. It wasn't just about confronting Jess or her family anymore. It wasn't even about the years of bitterness that had been building between them. No, this was about Claire, about her. For once, it was her turn to take control of her own life, her own identity. She was done playing the role of the quiet, invisible woman in their drama. Once she got into her car, she leaned back against the seat, staring at the dashboard. She needed to think, to plan. Claire had always been more than just a mother, more than just a wife. She had forgotten that part of herself. In the haze of raising Jess, of fitting into the mold of what the Petersons expected of her, she had lost touch with the woman she used to be. The woman who had dreams, who had goals, who had fought for everything she had. Her mind began to shift, slowly at first, like gears grinding into place. She needed something to break free from the suffocating web of Jess's manipulation and the Petersons' unspoken expectations. Something that wasn't for them. Something that was for her. The solution was simple. She needed to find her own path again. But where to start? Her phone buzzed in the cup holder, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Charlotte. How did it go? Claire smiled faintly, fingers tightening around the phone. Charlotte had always been there for her, and it was Charlotte who had helped Claire realize she didn't have to live in the shadows any longer. They had talked for hours after the cookout confrontation, Charlotte reassuring her that it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming her life. Claire had needed to hear that. Claire tapped out a quick reply. It went as expected, but I'm done hiding. I'm planning my next move. Her thumb hovered over the screen. What was her next move? She had spent years trapped in the narrative of being Jess's mother, Luke's wife, the person everyone could overlook and take advantage of. Now it was time to step into the light. She reached out to an old friend, Emily, who had connections in the local community. Emily had been one of the first people Claire had met when she moved to town. Back then, they'd both been new, both looking for a sense of belonging. Emily had quickly become a confidant, a true friend. someone who knew Claire before she'd buried herself under the weight of family obligations. Emily had a reputation as a mover and shaker in the community. She knew people. She could help Claire find something to fill the void Jess had left. Claire's fingers tapped out the message. Emily, do you have time to catch up soon? I need some advice about opportunities in the community. Once the message was sent, Claire let her mind wander. She remembered her career before marriage, before motherhood. She had been a successful event planner, thriving in a job that allowed her to be creative, to organize, to feel useful outside the confines of her home. She'd put that life on hold for Jess, for Luke, for the Petersons. It wasn't a decision she regretted, but now, sitting here in the stillness of the car, it felt like a lifetime ago. Claire thought of the woman she had been, confident, capable, independent. She wasn't going to let that woman die with the years spent in the background. It was time to resurrect that part of herself. I'm going to prove it to myself, she thought. Prove that I can succeed, that I can be more than just the invisible woman in my daughter's life. She smiled to herself, the first real smile in what felt like years. She wouldn't do it for Jess. She wouldn't do it for the Petersons. She would do it for Claire. For the woman she had been before she became a shadow. Before she was drowned out by everyone else's expectations. The phone buzzed again. It was Charlotte. I know this might be hard, but think about what you need, not what they want. And trust me, you'll be surprised at what happens next. Claire's heart fluttered with a mix of nerves and excitement. Charlotte was right. This wasn't about revenge. This was about building something for herself, carving out a space where she could shine. And then the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, a gathering, her own. One where she would be the center of attention, not a peripheral figure. Not someone hiding in the background. She would invite those who truly mattered, those who saw her, not the ones who used her, ignored her, or took her for granted. She would host a dinner, a small but meaningful event that would mark the first step toward her new life. It wouldn't be flashy. It wouldn't be for show. It would be a declaration, I'm still here, and I'm reclaiming my life. Claire's hands tightened around the steering wheel. It was time to act. This was only the beginning, and Claire was ready to take the next step, toward herself. The sun hung low over Claire's backyard, casting a warm golden glow across the well-manicured lawn. The scent of grilled burgers and sizzling vegetables filled the air, mingling with the sound of soft chatter and the occasional pop of a firecracker from a distant celebration. But for Claire, this cookout wasn't just about food or fireworks. It was about something bigger, about reclaiming a part of herself that had long been lost. The tables were set, the drinks were chilling in coolers, and Claire moved through it all with an ease she hadn't felt in years. She was in charge here. The thought felt like a revelation, the weight of it both exhilarating and liberating. This was her moment, the first step in a journey that was entirely her own. As Claire adjusted the placement of the napkins, making sure everything was just right, she heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Her heart gave a small, unexpected jolt. She knew who it was before she even turned to look. Jess. Her daughter stepped out of the car, her posture stiff, her eyes scanning the backyard with a guarded expression. Jess hadn't been invited directly, but Claire had made it clear to Luke that she would be hosting her own gathering this year, and if he wanted to come, he was welcome to bring anyone. Jess had, predictably, decided to show up, though it was clear from the look on her face that her presence wasn't motivated by a desire to celebrate. Jess walked toward the group, her heels clicking sharply on the stone path, her smile a little too bright. "Wow, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with a forced sweetness. "Everything looks amazing." Her eyes swept over the neatly arranged spread, the vibrant decorations, the guests mingling in the yard. It was all so different from what Jess was used to. The house always having been a backdrop to her, an afterthought in the grand scheme of things. Claire smiled, meeting Jess's gaze with a calm confidence. "Thank you, Jess. I'm glad you could make it." There was no bitterness in her voice, no trace of the resentment that had built up over the years. She had moved past that. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about her. Jess tried to step into the role she had always played, trying to dominate the conversation with Luke's family and friends. But something was different now. Claire watched her daughter, saw the way she paused, her eyes flicking nervously between the people she had once commanded so effortlessly. Jess was unsettled. Claire could see it in the way her posture tightened, in the way her laughter didn't reach her eyes. For the first time in years, Claire was the one at the center of attention. It wasn't a brash, loud command of a room, but rather an effortless, quiet strength that commanded respect. As she walked around greeting her guests, both familiar and new, she felt the energy shift. People weren't looking over her shoulder to see where Jess was, or waiting for her to fade into the background. They were looking at Claire. They were listening to her, enjoying her company. Luke's family was taken aback by how seamlessly Claire was running the show. She was no longer the wallflower who had smiled politely and tried to make herself invisible. She had stepped into her own space, and it felt as though the Petersons, Jess, Helen, all of them, were realizing, with a strange sense of unease, that they no longer controlled the narrative of Claire's life. Jess tried, of course. She attempted to dominate the conversation, weaving herself back into the social fabric she had once occupied with ease. But Claire wasn't having it. When Jess tried to insert herself into a discussion about local politics, Claire simply smiled and redirected the conversation, speaking with a confidence that held the room's attention. "Oh, I actually think we're doing really well here in town," Claire said, stepping in with a subtle but firm tone. "There's a lot of potential for growth, especially with all the new developments. Don't you think, Mike?" She turned to one of the newer guests, a neighbor who had just moved into the area. Mike nodded enthusiastically, grateful for the change in direction, and suddenly Claire was in the driver's seat of the conversation. Jess tried to interrupt again, but Claire was too quick, moving the group forward with her poised, steady presence. The small victory felt sweet. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about showing Jess up or getting back at the Petersons for their years of ignoring her. This was about Claire finally taking her own place in the world, a place where she was valued, where she was seen for who she was, not just as a background character to someone else's story. As the evening went on, Claire found herself laughing more freely than she had in ages, her guests enjoying the light-hearted atmosphere she had so carefully crafted. It felt good to be in charge. It felt good to have everyone's respect, to be the one people came to for answers, for leadership. For once, it wasn't about her fitting in with them. It was about them coming to her space, accepting her for who she was. Jess stood off to the side, her arms crossed, a thin line of frustration pulling at the corners of her mouth. Claire could see her discomfort in every stiff movement, every attempt to reinsert herself into the center of attention. Jess wasn't used to being in the background, but Claire was learning to embrace the position. It wasn't just about running the cookout. It was about owning her own life, her own choices, her own space. She had been invisible for too long, but no more. As the night drew to a close, Claire stood at the edge of the yard, the soft glow of the porch light casting a warm halo around her. Her guests had left, some lingering for longer goodbyes, and Claire was left standing alone in the yard, the remnants of the evening drifting around her like an echo. The air felt light, freeing. She could finally breathe again. This was only the beginning, and Claire was ready for whatever came next. The air was cooler now, the sky darkening into hues of deep blue and purple as the last of Claire's guests trickled out, leaving behind empty plates and half-filled glasses. The cookout, which had felt so lively only a short while ago, had begun to wind down. Laughter still echoed faintly in Claire's ears, but there was something different in the air now. She stood at the edge of her backyard, the soft glow of the porch light casting long shadows around her, a gentle breeze lifting her hair as she took it all in. For the first time in years, she felt at peace, grounded in her own skin, centered in her own space. This cookout had been hers, truly hers, and it had been a quiet victory in a long battle she'd been fighting silently for too long. But just as Claire was allowing herself to breathe in that sense of achievement, she felt the prickling weight of a presence behind her. She turned slowly, her breath catching when she saw Jess standing at the edge of the yard, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her gaze fixed firmly on Claire. Jess's face was a mask of frustration, the tightness in her jaw betraying her struggle to keep her composure. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice low and controlled. But Claire could hear the strain beneath it. Claire took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, steadying herself before she answered. "Of course, Jess, but we don't need to do this here." She gestured to the patio, where a few stragglers were still cleaning up. The last thing she wanted now was to let Jess hijack this moment for herself. They moved away from the noise, into a quiet corner of the garden, where the soft murmur of voices became distant, muffled. Jess stood rigid, waiting for Claire to speak, but Claire wasn't going to be the one to break the silence this time. Claire finally met her daughter's gaze, her expression calm, but her eyes were steady and resolute. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "and I've decided that I'm done. I'm done being your punching bag. I'm done letting you walk all over me, dismissing me, pretending I don't matter. I've spent too many years being your shadow, but no more. I am not that woman anymore." Jess blinked, her mouth tightening into a thin line. "What are you talking about, Mom?" she spat, her voice betraying a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'm your daughter. I've always been your daughter. You've done nothing but give for me." She was starting to shake, but Claire stood her ground, her posture unyielding. "Jess," Claire said gently, but there was a firmness in her voice now, a strength that surprised even her. "The sacrifices I've made for you were because I loved you. But love isn't about submission. It's not about being silenced or overlooked or made to feel invisible just to keep the peace. I've let you treat me like that for too long, and I'm not going to do it anymore." Jess's eyes flashed with something dark. Maybe guilt, maybe anger. But she quickly masked it with a laugh, her voice high-pitched and defensive. "Oh, please, Mom. Don't turn this around on me. You don't think I notice what's been going on? You've spent years letting me take the blame for everything. And now you want to make me feel like I'm the bad guy for—" "Stop," Claire cut in, her voice quiet but unwavering. "This isn't about you anymore. This is about me. You've been the center of my life for so long, and it's time for me to find my own place in the world. I'm not going to be dragged down by your anger or your resentment anymore. I'm done being your emotional support, your backup. It's time for you to start seeing me for who I am, not just as a tool to get what you want." The words hung in the air between them, a long, oppressive silence stretching after Claire's declaration. Jess opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes flicking to the ground, then back to Claire. She took a step forward, her voice now thick with emotion. "Mom, you don't understand. I need you. I've always needed you. You were the one person I could count on to always be there no matter what. And now you're changing, and I don't know how to handle it. I don't want to lose you." There it was. The vulnerability that Claire hadn't seen in so long, the admission that Jess too was afraid. Claire's heart softened, but she didn't let herself waver. "You're not going to lose me, Jess," Claire said, her voice gentler now, but still firm. "But you need to understand that my life doesn't revolve around you anymore. I've been so focused on making you happy, on doing everything I could to hold things together. But you don't get to control me. Not anymore. Just then, Luke stepped into the corner of the yard, having quietly observed the conversation from a distance. His face was tight with discomfort, but there was something new in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. He stepped closer to Jess, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Claire's right, Jess," Luke said, his voice low but resolute. "You need to respect her. She's not your doormat. She's your mother, and she deserves more than what you've been giving her." Jess flinched at his words, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment there was a silence so thick it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. "I've been silent for too long," Luke continued, his gaze flicking between Jess and Claire. "I've watched this happen, and I've let it. I should have stepped in sooner, but I didn't. And I'm sorry. But it's time you understood. Claire's not the person you can walk over anymore. She deserves respect, Jess. You both need to learn that." Jess opened her mouth, her eyes brimming with frustration, but no words came out. Instead, she looked away, her face contorting into something between anger and confusion. Her shoulders slumped, and for a fleeting moment Claire saw the cracks forming in the armor Jess had built around herself. "I'm scared, Mom," Jess whispered, her voice small now, almost breaking. "I'm scared I'll lose control over everything if I don't keep pushing. If I don't keep everything together." Claire's heart ached, but she didn't flinch. "You're not losing control, Jess," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "You're growing up, and so am I." Jess didn't say anything, but the silence between them spoke volumes. It was no longer the silence of fear or anger. It was the silence of something shifting, something breaking free. Claire knew it wasn't over, that there was still much to be worked through, but for the first time in years, she felt like she had control of the narrative. And she wasn't about to let Jess take that away from her again. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, and Claire was ready to face whatever came next. The house was quiet now, the only sounds coming from the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Claire sat at the kitchen table, her hands resting on the smooth surface, her eyes fixed on the half-empty coffee cup in front of her. The day had unfolded in ways she hadn't imagined, each moment like a building block, each conversation a step toward something unfamiliar and terrifying. But as she waited, a quiet certainty began to settle in her chest. She had been avoiding this moment for so long. And now, it was time. The door to the kitchen creaked open, and Claire looked up to see Jess standing in the doorway. Her daughter's face was unreadable, a mixture of frustration and uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Her posture was stiff, as though she wasn't sure how to approach her mother, how to approach someone who had become so foreign, so unpredictable in her eyes. Jess hesitated, then took a deep breath, stepping further into the room. "We need to talk," she said, her voice quieter than Claire had expected. "What the hell was that earlier, with Grandma and Grandpa? You've completely changed." Claire's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't react right away. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. She had been preparing for this moment for a long time, and now that it was here, she felt a strange calm. "Sit down, Jess," Claire said quietly, her voice steady. "I think it's time we talked about everything." Jess lowered herself into the chair across from Claire, her body stiff, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice cracking with a mix of anger and confusion. "Why now, Mom? Why are you suddenly acting like this?" she asked, her eyes searching Claire's face. "You've always been there for me. You've always taken care of me. And now, just like that, you've decided you're done?" Her words came out in a rush, as though she couldn't get them out fast enough. You don't get to just change the rules, not after all these years. Claire's gaze softened, but her voice remained firm. No, Jess. I don't get to be your punching bag anymore. I don't get to just sit back and take it while you insult me, belittle me, treat me like I'm nothing. I've spent too many years trying to fit into your world, trying to be something I'm not just to please you and the people around us. But I'm not doing it anymore. Jess's eyes flashed with defensiveness. I didn't ask for all of that, Mom. I didn't ask for you to give up everything for me. Her voice shook as she continued. I never asked you to put your life on hold to make me happy. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected Jess to take responsibility. Not yet, anyway. She could see the walls starting to crack. But Jess still wasn't ready to fully confront the truth. No, Claire said softly, her voice now calm, almost resigned. You didn't ask for it. But I did it because I thought that's what being a mother meant. I thought my job was to make your life easier, to make sure you had everything you wanted. But I never asked myself what I needed. I never thought about what I wanted. She paused, the weight of her own words settling over her like a heavy blanket. And now I realize I've been living for you, for everyone but myself. I can't do that anymore. Jess's face twisted, her fists clenched on her lap. So what? You're just going to walk away from me? From everything we've been through? Her voice rose, but there was a crack in it now, a note of vulnerability that Claire had never heard before. I need you, Mom. You're all I've ever had. I can't lose you. Claire's heart clenched at the raw pain in her daughter's voice, but she didn't let her emotions pull her in. I'm not walking away from you, Jess, Claire said, her voice steady, though the words cut deep. But I'm not going to be everything to you anymore. I've spent years sacrificing myself for you, thinking it was love, thinking it was the right thing to do. But I've learned that I can love you and still take care of myself, and I'm not going to feel guilty for that anymore. Jess's eyes flickered with something. Regret, maybe, before she quickly pushed it away. You never understood, she muttered, her voice tight with frustration. You never understood how much I needed you, how scared I was. I felt like I was losing control, like I was going to fall apart if I didn't have you there, holding everything together. Her voice broke slightly. You don't know what that's like, to feel like you have to control everything to keep it from falling apart. Claire leaned forward slightly, her eyes softening. I understand more than you think, Jess. I understand the fear, the pressure to keep everything together. But I can't be the one who fixes it for you anymore. You have to learn to take responsibility for your own life, for your own choices. And I need to learn how to live for myself. Jess's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, her face pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words faltered before they could leave her lips. I've been jealous of you, Mom, she whispered, her voice raw. You've always been so strong. You never needed anyone, and I hated that. I wanted you to need me. I wanted to be the one who kept you together. And now, I see you standing here, doing this, and it scares the hell out of me. Her voice cracked. I'm afraid I'm losing control of everything, of you, of myself. Claire felt a sharp pang in her chest, but this time she didn't look away. You're not losing me, Jess. But you have to stop trying to control me. You have to let me go and learn how to live your own life, too. I'm not going anywhere, but I can't be the person you keep leaning on forever. The room fell silent between them. Jess sat there, her shoulders hunched, her eyes cast downward. Claire reached across the table, her hand hovering just above Jess's. We're both going to be okay, Jess, Claire said softly, but it starts with you seeing me. Really seeing me. Not as the person who fixes everything, but as a woman who's learning to live for herself. Jess met her mother's eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a glimmer of understanding in her gaze. It wasn't over yet, but it was a start. And for Claire, that was enough. The days following the cookout were heavy with a strange, uncomfortable quiet. Claire could feel the shift in the air as Jess tried, albeit awkwardly, to reach out, to bridge the widening gap between them. Each time Claire saw her daughter, there was that tension, that delicate dance of tentative gestures, uncertain words, and an unspoken understanding that things between them had irrevocably changed. Jess texted her the morning after, a simple message that felt almost too casual, too safe to convey what was really on her mind. "Hey Mom, I've been thinking. I'm sorry for everything. Let's talk soon, okay?" Claire stared at the screen for a long moment, her fingers hovering above the keys. She'd come so far, stood up for herself in a way she never had before. But now, as Jess's words loomed on the screen in front of her, Claire felt the weight of what was at stake, the need to protect her newfound sense of self, but also the desire to heal the rift between them. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, Claire focused on what she could control: her own life. She had spent years living in the shadows of Jess's needs, the Petersons' judgments, and Luke's inaction. But no more. The first step was small: an early morning phone call to her old contact at the local community center. Claire had always loved event planning, and now, with a fresh sense of independence, she was ready to take it back. As soon as the voice on the other end picked up, Claire felt something shift again. This wasn't about her being a wife or a mother. It was about her, the woman she was before all the roles had been piled onto her. "Hi, it's Claire Thompson. I wanted to talk about organizing the next charity gala. I've got some ideas I'd love to run by you," she said, her voice steady, sure of itself. As the days passed, Claire found herself carving out more space for her own life, working on projects that made her feel like herself again. She enrolled in a few online courses, revisited hobbies she'd long abandoned, and slowly started to feel the pieces of her old identity fall back into place. For the first time in years, Claire felt like she had purpose beyond just caring for everyone else. But Jess's presence still hung like a shadow in the background. Claire couldn't escape it, even as she embraced her new sense of independence. Jess continued to reach out in fits and starts: an occasional text, an invitation to lunch that was more out of obligation than desire. Claire didn't respond immediately, taking the time to carefully assess where things stood between them. She wasn't sure if Jess was genuinely trying to make amends or if it was just a way of easing her guilt. Then, one evening, Claire was sitting on her porch, sipping a glass of iced tea, when she saw a familiar figure walking toward the front door. Luke. Her first instinct was to turn away, to ignore him, but something in his posture, his hesitant step, his avoidance of her eyes, told her that this wasn't just another round of small talk. He stopped just outside the door, his hands jammed deep into his pockets. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. Claire nodded, stepping aside to let him in. They stood for a moment in the entryway, the air thick with unsaid things. She didn't want to play the role of the scolding wife anymore. This wasn't about reliving old wounds, it was about moving forward. "I've been thinking," Luke began, his gaze still focused on the floor, "and I realize I should have stepped in sooner. With everything. With Jess. I should have said something, should have supported you more. He paused, struggling for words. "I've been passive, Claire, and it's not fair to you. I didn't protect you, and I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air, tentative and raw, but Claire could hear the sincerity in his voice. This wasn't easy for him. It never had been. But as she stood there, listening to him, Claire realized something. The apology was important, but it wasn't the end of the story. "Luke," she said, her voice steady but firm, "I appreciate that, I do. But this isn't just about you and me anymore. It's about me, my life. You've been silent for so long, and I can't let that continue. I can't keep letting this family and Jess define who I am. She met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. We need to respect each other's space, and I need to know that my independence matters, my life matters, outside of this family dynamic. Luke didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, as if the weight of her words was sinking in, as if he finally understood the depth of her needs. "You're right," he whispered. "I haven't treated you with the respect you deserve, and I can't expect you to just forgive me and go back to how things were. I understand that now." Claire took a deep breath. It was a small victory, but it was enough for her to start rebuilding trust. It wasn't about fixing everything overnight. It was about taking the steps, the hard conversations, the messy in-betweens, and learning to move forward without the weight of the past crushing her. Later that evening, Jess called. "I've been thinking," Jess said softly, her voice hesitant. "I want to apologize, Mom, for everything. I didn't realize how much I was holding on to you, controlling you, thinking I could keep everything together just by keeping you close. I was scared, and I didn't know how to let go." Claire closed her eyes, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her glass. "Jess," she said, her voice calm but filled with a quiet strength. "We've both been afraid, but I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not going to keep being the person you lean on to fix things. I'm learning to live for myself, and I need you to do the same." There was a long pause before Jess spoke again, her voice softer this time. "I get it, Mom. I really do. And I want to learn how to be there for you, not just for me." It wasn't perfect, this conversation. It wasn't a clean break from the past, but it was progress. Jess was finally beginning to see her mother, not as someone to control, but as someone with her own life, her own desires. The moment was a breakthrough, and Claire knew it was just the beginning. Tomorrow, she would take another step, another breath, another moment for herself. And this time, she wouldn't be afraid. The table was set for dinner, but the usual warmth of family gatherings was absent. The soft clink of silverware, the quiet hum of background music. None of it could mask the tension that hung thick in the air. Claire sat at the head of the table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, eyes steady as she surveyed the faces around her. Jess, sitting across from her, still wore the remnants of guilt and uncertainty. Luke sat beside her, his usual calm demeanor now clouded by the weight of the conversation they were about to have. The room was quiet, expectant. No one seemed sure where to begin, so Claire did what she always did. She took the first step. "I called this meeting," she began, her voice calm but firm, "because it's time we talked. I've spent too many years being silent, accepting my place in this family without question. But that stops now." Luke shifted uncomfortably in his chair, casting a quick glance at Jess, who was looking down at her lap. Claire could feel the weight of their discomfort, but she didn't let it deter her. This conversation needed to happen. "I've been a mother, a wife, a daughter-in-law," Claire continued, her voice steady. "I've given so much of myself to everyone at this table, but in the process, I lost sight of who I was. I let myself be pushed aside, treated as if my feelings didn't matter, as if I were just a backdrop to everyone else's life. And I'm not doing that anymore." There was a long silence. Claire could feel the eyes of Luke, Jess, and even her own in-laws on her, waiting for her to say more, to explain herself. But Claire wasn't going to apologize for asserting her boundaries. She had come to terms with the fact that this wasn't just about her relationship with Jess or Luke. It was about her relationship with herself. And she wasn't going to shrink back anymore. Jess was the first to break the silence. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and pained. I've been selfish, Mom," she said quietly, her voice faltering. "I didn't realize how much I was relying on you. how much I was controlling you, trying to make you fit into my world instead of letting you live your own. She paused, swallowing hard, the words coming out in a rush. I'm sorry, I've been horrible, and I don't know how to fix it, but I want to. I want to support you. I want to learn how to be there for you, like you've always been for me. Claire's heart softened, but she didn't let herself waver. She'd heard apologies before, but it was the follow-through that mattered. It wasn't enough to say the words. Jess had to prove she meant them. I'm glad to hear that, Jess, Claire replied, her voice gentle but firm. But it's going to take time. You've treated me like an afterthought for too long. It's not something I can just forget. I need to see the changes. I need to feel respected and valued, not just as your mother, but as myself. Jess nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I will, Mom. I promise. I'll show you. Luke shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the intensity of the moment. His eyes met Claire's, and for the first time she saw a hint of regret in his gaze. Claire, he said, his voice low, I should have stepped in sooner. I should have supported you, should have stood up for you when Jess was treating you like that. But I didn't. And I'm sorry for that. I've let this dynamic continue for too long. Claire exhaled slowly, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She had waited for this moment, but now that it was here, it felt like a door closing on a chapter she'd never fully been able to close. Still, she didn't look away. I don't need your apology, Luke, she said, her voice steady. What I need is for you to stop enabling this behavior. Stop letting Jess or anyone else dictate the way I'm treated. You've been passive for too long, and I won't let you stay silent anymore. Luke's face reddened slightly, but he didn't argue. Instead, he nodded. You're right. I haven't been there the way you needed me to be. I'll do better. Helen, who had been sitting silently in the background, finally spoke up. Her voice was soft, but pointed. I'm sorry, Claire, she said, her eyes shifting between Claire and Jess. We've all been complicit in letting things go on like this. I never meant to hurt you. I just... She trailed off, her gaze dropping to her hands, and for the first time in Claire's memory, she looked genuinely remorseful. Claire's eyes softened, but only for a moment. She wasn't about to let her in-laws off the hook so easily. It's not enough just to apologize, Claire said, her voice quiet but firm. You've all allowed this family dynamic to continue. You've enabled Jess's behavior, and that's been hard for me to accept. But I'm not accepting it anymore. We all need to change. The conversation hung in the air, heavy with the unspoken truth that they were all going to have to work hard to rebuild the trust that had been broken. The silence that followed felt less oppressive than before, as though something had shifted, as though they had begun the slow, painful process of facing the truth. Jess wiped her eyes and looked up at Claire, a small but genuine smile tugging at her lips. I'll do the work, Mom. I swear. I know it's going to take time, but I'm willing to try. Claire met her daughter's gaze, her own heart swelling with something close to hope. I'm glad to hear it, Jess. We'll get there. But it's going to be a process. And you need to be patient with yourself, with me, and with everyone else. Luke, watching his wife and daughter, finally spoke up again. We'll all work together, he said, his voice steady. It's time for a new beginning, one where we all respect each other, where Claire is seen and heard. Claire felt a deep breath fill her lungs, a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to shrink to fit into a family that never truly understood her. This was just the beginning, but it felt like a start. And for Claire, that was all she needed. The days after the confrontation felt like a breath of fresh air, the weight of unspoken tension finally lifting from Claire's shoulders. It was as though she had stepped out of the shadows and into the sunlight. She no longer felt like a background figure in her own life. She felt alive, fully present, as if she had rejoined herself after years of being lost to the roles of wife and mother. The first step was small, almost imperceptible to anyone else. Claire took her morning slowly, savoring the time she once rushed through. She sipped her coffee on the porch, watching the birds flit through the trees. She'd spent so many years hurrying through life, prioritizing everyone's needs over her own, that it had become almost impossible to stop. But now, she could breathe without guilt. It wasn't just about self-care. It was about claiming space in her own life, space that had once been taken up by everyone else. Claire signed up for a yoga class at the community center. At first, it was hard to silence the voice in her head that asked if this was selfish. But as she sank into the stretch of her body, the slow rhythm of her breath, she realized how much she had needed this. A few weeks in, and she felt stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. She had learned to listen to herself in a way she never had before. She also began attending local events again, reconnecting with friends she had distanced herself from in her years of being swallowed up by family dynamics. Sarah, an old friend from her event planning days, invited Claire to a charity fundraiser. Claire hesitated at first. She hadn't been to one of these events in years, not since the days when she'd been an invisible organizer behind the scenes. But now, she was ready. She needed to be seen, needed to prove to herself that she could stand on her own. Walking into the event, she was struck by how much had changed. There was no frantic energy behind the scenes anymore, no nervous chatter as she ran around organizing last-minute details. This time, Claire was present, enjoying the atmosphere, reconnecting with old colleagues, and feeling an unexpected surge of pride in herself. She was no longer the woman in the background. She was now someone who was fully participating in life. Jess reached out again, albeit slowly. The texts were sporadic at first, little check-ins, but Claire could sense the effort. Jess was trying. It was clear she had absorbed the lessons Claire had taught, though the changes came in small, faltering steps. Jess invited Claire for coffee, and when they sat down, Jess actually listened, truly listened, without trying to dominate the conversation. At the same time, there was still a distance between them. Jess's old habits were slow to die. Claire could see it in the way Jess sometimes tried to manipulate her, to steer the conversation back to herself, to pull Claire back into the role of being her emotional support. But this time, Claire didn't let it slide. She set boundaries. She spoke up when Jess overstepped, but she did it with kindness, with patience. It wasn't about being harsh. It was about being clear. Jess wasn't going to control her anymore, and Claire wasn't afraid to let her know that. At home, things between Claire and Luke also began to shift. Their conversations grew more open, less guarded. Luke, while still reserved in his own way, made more of an effort to check in with Claire, to ask her opinion about things. They started to make decisions together, not as a traditional husband and wife, but as equals, partners. It wasn't perfect, and there were moments when the old dynamics threatened to creep back in. But Claire refused to let that happen. She stood firm in her own boundaries, no longer allowing her needs to be overlooked. Luke respected that. For the first time in their marriage, he seemed to really see her, the woman, not just the wife. One evening, Claire and Luke sat together in the living room, the soft light of the lamps casting a warm glow around them. They talked about the future, about what Claire wanted from it. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about her, about what she needed, about what she dreamed of. For once, it was clear to Claire that Luke was willing to be a part of her life, but only as an equal, and for the first time, Claire felt safe in that space. Jess continued to make efforts, though sometimes she faltered. Claire could see her old habits creeping in, the guilt trips, the subtle manipulation. But Claire didn't shrink from them. She gently, but firmly, reminded Jess of her own boundaries, reinforcing the new dynamics of their relationship. She was no longer a lifeline Jess could pull on whenever she felt insecure. She had her own life now, and Jess would have to learn to live with that. As the weeks passed, Claire started feeling the shift in her family's rhythm. They were no longer a family of silent expectations and unspoken resentments. Things were changing, slowly but surely. Claire led by example. She showed them how to set boundaries, how to respect each other's space. She showed them that love didn't mean sacrifice at the cost of your own identity. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic breakthroughs. It was small, subtle, but it was enough. Claire knew she had done the hardest part. She had stood up for herself, and now she was living her truth. And while Jess's progress was slow, Claire could see the effort. The changes were there, even if they were small. Jess was starting to respect Claire's independence, and that was the most important thing. It wasn't about perfection. It was about the effort, the recognition that things had to be different from now on. As Claire stood by the window one evening, looking out at the world outside, peaceful, expansive, and full of possibilities, she realized something. This wasn't just the beginning of a new chapter for her family. It was the beginning of a whole new life, one where she was finally free to be herself. And for the first time in years, Claire wasn't afraid of what came next. Claire adjusted her dress in the hallway mirror, her fingers brushing over the fabric as she took a deep breath. Tonight wasn't just another family dinner at Luke's parents' house. It felt different. An opportunity for something new. This time, she was not walking in as the dutiful wife, the invisible mother. She was Claire, her own woman, standing in her truth, ready to face her family, but on her own terms. She heard the sound of voices drifting through the house as she stepped out into the living room. Luke was already there, greeting his parents with his usual warm smile. He caught sight of Claire just as she reached the doorway and gave her a small, almost uncertain nod. Tonight was the first time they would all be together in this new dynamic. A family finally coming together, but with new roles and expectations. As they drove to the Petersons' house, Claire couldn't shake the quiet sense of disbelief. This was it. The moment where she was not just invited to the table, but included as an equal. The significance of it hung in the air like a promise, a breath of fresh air. She had spent so long trying to fit into a family that had never truly seen her, and now she was about to experience the family dynamic on her own terms. Upon arriving, Claire was greeted by Luke's parents with an unexpected warmth. Nancy, her eyes less guarded than usual, smiled at Claire, her handshake firm and respectful. "We're so glad you could join us tonight," she said, her voice genuine, with none of the dismissive edge that Claire had long grown accustomed to. Claire smiled back, but she didn't feel the need to hide behind pleasantries anymore. She was no longer apologizing for taking up space. The evening unfolded with an unexpected ease. Jess had also made an effort to make the atmosphere lighter. She kept the conversation flowing, laughing in places where she usually would have remained quiet, and it seemed, for the first time, she wasn't trying to dominate the room. There was a softness to her that Claire hadn't seen before. A hint of humility in the way she interacted with both Luke's family and Claire. The dinner was relaxed, even intimate. Claire found herself enjoying the meal, savoring the moments between bites, feeling a sense of calm that had eluded her for so many years. Luke's father, Greg, no longer regarded her with that faint air of disapproval. His eyes met hers more often, and though he didn't say much, Claire felt the subtle shift in his posture, his unspoken acknowledgement of her presence. For the first time in years, Claire didn't feel like she had to explain herself or shrink into the background. She listened to the conversations happening around her, contributed when she felt like it, But most importantly, she didn't let herself get lost in the shuffle. This evening was hers as much as it was anyone else's. Jess, sitting next to Claire, finally turned toward her with a small but genuine smile. "You know, Mom," she said, her voice quieter than usual, "I've really been thinking about everything, about how much you've given, how much you've always done. I I admire how strong you are. You don't just go along with what people expect of you, and I've been taking that for granted." Claire's heart did a strange thing at her daughter's words. It was as if a weight had shifted, a long-held pressure beginning to lift. For Jess to see her strength and acknowledge it, it was more than Claire had ever hoped for. The awkwardness between them had not disappeared, but this moment, this simple recognition, felt like a step toward something real, something that could sustain their relationship in the future. "Thank you, Jess," Claire replied softly, meeting her daughter's eyes. "It hasn't been easy, but it's what I had to do for myself. And you're right. I've always tried to make everyone else happy, but now I'm learning to make myself happy too." The silence that followed was comfortable. Luke looked over at Claire with a quiet admiration. "You've come a long way," he said, his voice steady, but Claire could hear the respect in it. "I've watched you grow, and I'm proud of you. I'm sorry it took me so long to see you the way I should have." Claire smiled at him, a small, knowing smile that acknowledged the weight of his words, but also the deep relief she felt in hearing them. It wasn't about forgiveness, it was about understanding, finally feeling seen and heard. For the first time in their marriage, Luke had truly seen her. The night wore on, and the conversations became lighter, more open. As the dessert plates were cleared away, Claire realized that this was the first time in a long time that she didn't feel like she had to fight for her place. For the first time, she was included without question, without having to beg for space at the table. This was a family in the process of shifting, trying to find a new balance, a new rhythm where everyone could breathe. When the evening began to wind down and Claire stood to say her goodbyes, Jess walked over and hugged her. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being strong enough to show me what real strength looks like." Claire hugged her back, feeling the shift in her daughter's embrace. Jess wasn't clinging to her anymore. She was letting go, in the way only someone who truly loved another person could. As Claire walked out the door with Luke, the cool night air greeted her, but it didn't feel cold. She felt warm from the inside out, alive, grounded, and finally at peace. The family dynamic wasn't perfect, but it was different. It was better. And it was a beginning. For the first time, Claire didn't just feel like she was surviving, she was living. And for the first time in years, Claire looked forward to whatever came next, not with fear or uncertainty, but with the quiet, confident expectation that she could handle it. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready. The soft evening light filtered through the window, casting warm shadows across Claire's living room. She sat on the couch, her legs tucked under her, her mind adrift in thought. Outside, the world continued on. Distant sounds of laughter from the neighbors, the soft rustling of leaves in the cool breeze, the steady rhythm of life. But inside, it was quiet, still. Claire felt the weight of everything that had happened, the confrontations, the healing, the slow but steady rebuilding of her life. She could almost feel the pieces of herself slotting back into place, fitting together in ways she hadn't realized were missing until now. The changes had been gradual, almost imperceptible at times. But when Claire really stopped to think about it, she realized how far she had come. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that cookout, afraid to speak up, afraid to take up space. No, now she was a woman who knew her worth, who no longer sought validation from anyone, especially not from the people who had kept her in the shadows for so long. Claire's eyes drifted to the photograph on the mantel, her and Jess, taken when Jess was young, Claire holding her tightly. It was a reminder of the woman she had been, the sacrifices she had made, the love she had given without hesitation. But it also served as a reminder of how far they had come, how Jess had, in her own way, started to see her mother as more than just a caretaker, more than just someone to rely on. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and that was enough. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a message from Jess, a short text that made Claire smile. "Hey Mom, I've been thinking a lot. I know things aren't perfect, but I'm really trying. I'm proud of how far you've come, and I'm here when you're ready." Claire took a deep breath, her fingers resting on the edge of the phone. The message wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a step, one of many that Jess would need to take, but one that showed she was starting to see her mother as an equal, not a lifeline. She typed a reply. "I'm proud of you too, and I'm here too. We'll keep working on it, one step at a time." As she pressed send, Claire felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. This was the beginning of something new, something real. No longer a mother and daughter bound by guilt or obligation, but two people who could see each other for who they truly were. It wouldn't be easy, but they would do it together, in their own time, in their own way. The door to the living room creaked open. Luke stepped in, a hesitant smile on his face. He had been quieter lately, but there was an openness in his demeanor that Claire hadn't seen before. He had started to listen, really listen to what she needed. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. Claire nodded, meeting his eyes with a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. "It's more than okay," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's good. Really good." Luke stepped closer, his expression thoughtful. "You've changed, Claire, and I don't just mean how you're acting. I mean, who you are now. You're not just the woman I married, you're stronger. You're someone I admire." He paused, his gaze lowering slightly. "I should have told you that sooner." Claire smiled, a slow, knowing smile. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but one of quiet acceptance. She wasn't looking for his approval anymore, but hearing him say it, finally saying it, felt like another piece of the puzzle falling into place. "Thank you," she said simply, her hand reaching out to gently rest on his. "I've needed you to see me, Luke, but more than that, I needed to see myself. And now I do." He nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "I think I understand that now." There was a moment of silence, not uncomfortable, but filled with the weight of everything they had gone through, everything they had learned. Claire stood and walked over to the window, looking out at the fading light of the evening. The sky was streaked with oranges and purples, the world on the cusp of night, a transition just like the one she had gone through. She had come so far. She had rebuilt herself, rebuilt her sense of self-worth. No longer would she be defined by the expectations of others, by the judgments of her daughter or her in-laws. She turned to Luke, a quiet confidence settling in her chest. "I've realized something," she said softly. "This house, this life, it's mine. Not just physically, but emotionally, and I'm going to keep it that way. It's time to stop living for everyone else." Luke watched her, his expression soft, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I think that's the best thing you've said in a long time." Claire walked back to the couch and sat down, her legs tucked under her. The soft light from the lamp beside her cast a warm glow, and for the first time in a long while, she felt completely at ease. There was a knock at the door. It was Jess, standing there hesitantly, her eyes meeting Claire's. She didn't wait for an invitation, stepping inside with a quiet resolve. "Hey," Jess said, her voice soft but clear. "I've been thinking about everything." I want you to know, I'm trying. I know it's not easy, and I know I've got a long way to go, but I'm here. And I'm proud of you, Mom. Claire looked at her daughter, the woman who had once felt so distant, so hard to reach. And now, there was an understanding between them. Something real, something they could both work on together. She smiled, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and relief. I'm proud of you too, Jess. And we'll keep going. Together. And for the first time in years, Claire knew that the future was something she could handle, on her terms. At the 4th of July cookout, my daughter thought I was there just for the free food. But in the end, I showed her I was there for so much more. I was there for my own future.